A good day to everybody. Our guest speaker, Dr. Panneerselvam, and dear friends. Hearty greetings from Dr. Paulos Gregorios chair at Mahatma Gandhi University. Welcome to the lecture series on the general theme, Shaping Our Common Future. Today, our lecture is by Professor S. Panneerselvam on philosophy and the confluence of cultures. But before inviting our distinguished speaker, let me say a few words about Gregorios and the chair. The chair was instituted by Mahatma Gandhi University in honor of Bishop Paulos Gregorios, well-known philosopher and theologian who had offered interdisciplinary lectures and seminars in the field of social sciences and international relations in the early stages of the Mahatma Gandhi University. His major works include on Enlightenment East and West. On the one hand, a highly critical assessment of the European Enlightenment that is at the source of modernity, modern Western rationality, and the rise of science and technology. And on the other hand, his futuristic visionary outline of Asian or Indian Enlightenment is primarily based on the Buddhist philosophical, rational, and transcendent heritage of India. Gregorios tried to redefine what we call the religious and the secular in a new way, particularly in the political, ideological context of modern India. His thesis attracted many in various university circles, including the Jawaharlal Nehru University and the Delhi University, where he used to give guest lectures. Gregorios became a general president of the Indian Philosophical Congress and the president of the Indian chapter of the International Neoplatonic Association. On the ecclesiastical side, he became the president of the World Council of Churches in Geneva. Well acquainted with the philosophy of science, as well as contemporary philosophical trends in the West, Gregorios moderated with remarkable ease and competence the week-long conference on faith, science, and the future at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1979. As a spiritual figure, he was deeply concerned about social peace and reconciliation. Several peace and nuclear forums in both the capitalist and socialist blocs of the time sought his leadership and moral backup. He was invited to give the inaugural address at the organizational body for the 100th anniversary of the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago, where, Swami Vivekananda made his legendary speech in 1893. Gregorios always sought a sangamam, a confluence of various world cultures and spiritual traditions, with a focus on one humanity for all religions, rather than one religion for all humanity. His broad-based understanding of human religiosity, world peace, economic justice, human dignity, and the future of humanity still inspires intellectuals and academics around the world. There are already several doctoral dissertations on his thought in various universities around the world. Apart from his many books, articles, and lectures, let me bring to your kind attention a recent book originally published by the Fortress Press in America, and now with the Indian edition, Paulos Gregorios, a reader, which brings together passages from his wide range of topics and disciplines with annotations, notes. Another book which is just coming up, probably end of this month, it would be published. It's titled Philosophy and the Quest for Meaning, Glimpses of Philosophical and Cultural Inquiry, Classical and Contemporary, Western and Eastern. Well, this is a very brief introduction to the life and thought of Paulos Mar Gregorios, who is well known to most of you. Now, about the distinguished speaker, Dr. S. Panneerselvam. He has graciously agreed to address us on the topic Philosophy and the Confluence of Cultures, a theme dear to him as well as to Paulos Mar Gregorios. Dr. Panneerselvam is a General Secretary of the Indian Philosophical Congress. And very early in that context, he made acquaintance with Paulos Mar Gregorios, and he still remains an ardent admirer of the thought of Metropolitan Paulos Gregorios. Formerly head of the department and professor of philosophy at the Madras University, Dr. Selvam continues to lecture in various universities across the world. You have read a short profile of Professor Selvam in the invitation notice. Closely associated with the Mahatma Gandhi University School of Gandhian Thought and Development Studies, he had personally known and admired Paulos Gregorios, as I have already noted. Now, Dr. Selvam is busy organizing the next Conference of Indian Philosophical Congress in Maharashtra in December this year. Dr. Panneerselvam, we are all very, very thankful to you for accepting this invitation and address us. Please.
Can I?
Yes, please, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Father Dr. George, for giving me this wonderful opportunity of sharing some of my views about Paulos Mar Gregorios, affectionately known as PMG. He was the bishop of the Orthodox Syriac Church in Delhi, and he was also the principal Orthodox Theological Seminary at Kottayam. And most importantly, he was the General President of Indian Philosophical Congress, which was started in the year 1925 by Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore and former President of India, Dr. S. Radhakrishnan. Now I am the General Secretary of Indian Philosophical Congress. So I admire the great contribution made by PMG sir. And I had the privilege of meeting him on various occasions, which I shall be discussing with you now. Besides being the General President of Indian Philosophical Congress, a prestigious post, I would say, because the President of Indian Philosophical Congress is a very prestigious post, and the best philosophers of our country is nominated for that president post. He was unanimously nominated for this post. And besides this, he was a member of Indian Council of Philosophical Research, New Delhi. This is the highest philosophical council functioning under the Ministry of Education. He was very closely associated with ICPR, otherwise known as the Indian Council of Philosophical Research. And he has contributed substantially for the progress of philosophy. As the former member of ICPR, I also was closely associated with PMG. And I should say that he's a versatile scholar. He's a scholar not only in theology, but also in philosophy. That is the reason why philosophers as well as theologians of this country and outside this country admire him. And not only that, he's the one who, to a larger extent, I would say, has shaped my thought. Because I should say that my encounter with PMG started in the year 1976, when I was a student in Madras Christian College. Because in this year, that is 1976, he gave a presidential address of the Kerala Philosophical Congress on the philosophy of Shankara at the Indian Philosophical Congress during December 1976, held at Alvi. As a student of philosophy, I also attended this Indian Philosophical Congress. That was the first time that I attended a Congress. And I had the privilege of meeting PMG sir. And I was very much influenced by the way in which he was discussing or evaluating Sri Shankara for his contribution for Indian philosophical tradition. Of course, later, this is my first encounter with him, 1976. Then later, he used to come to Madras Christian College a number of times because my teacher, Chiranjeevi Srinivasa Rao, who was the head of the Department of Philosophy, Madras Christian College, and PMG were very close friends. So he used to come to Madras Christian College for a number of seminars. And also, he was closely associated with another teacher of mine, Professor R. Balasubramaniam at Madras University, because he has a close affinity with two great philosophers of the South. One is T.M.P. Mahadevan, and another is Professor R. Balasubramaniam. So from 1976 onwards, my relation with PMG continued, I should say. And later, when he was in Delhi, I had the privilege of meeting him a number of times during seminars and conferences, because whenever Professor D.P. Chattopadhyaya, the former chairman of ICPR, had organized some conferences, he used to invite PMG sir. And PMG used to attend these conferences. And I had the privilege of meeting him during these conferences. And I should say that he has shaped my thoughts, especially with regard to two areas which I should mention here. One is postmodernism and hermeneutics, which I shall be discussing with you, of course, very briefly later. And I had the privilege of attending some of his lectures when he was delivering lectures in Jawaharlal Nehru University. And one uniqueness of PMG is that though he was a very great scholar, he was a down-to-earth person, because he used to discuss many of the philosophical themes with me. And whenever I had some doubts with regard to postmodernism or hermeneutics, he used to sit with me and clear my doubts. Imagine such a great person sitting with this ordinary person, that is me, and discussing the problems of philosophy and also trying to help me in solving some of the problems of philosophy. So I am always grateful to PMG for shaping my thoughts, because he is a visionary, I would say. He's a visionary in the sense that he could approach philosophical problems for the betterment of the world. That's why I would call him as visionary, because he was not interested in mere abstract thinking. He was not interested in discussing some abstract concepts of philosophy. He was more concerned about how we can take philosophy to a common man, how philosophy can help us to progress the humanity. That was his aim. That's why people got attracted to his philosophical thoughts as well as his theological understanding. And I would say that he's a blend of a tradition and modernity, because he has got a very high evaluation of Indian philosophical tradition. So I would say he's one who has promoted the tradition, Indian tradition, but at the same time, he was also concerned about modernity. That is the reason why I would say that he is the blend. He could combine both tradition and modernity. By developing tradition as a tool for understanding modernity, PMG could see that both tradition and modernity can travel together without having any conflict. I admire him for the main reason that he was very much influenced by Gadamer, whom I consider as one of the best philosophers of this world. Because like PMG, Gadamer was also interested in relating tradition with modernity. Because tradition, both for PMG as well as Gadamer, is which connects the past, present with that of the future. So there is always a progress in human values. It is because of the main reason that tradition is that which connects the past, present with that of the future. And there are some important themes which I should mention here, which was very close to PMG's heart, I should say. For example, he was very much interested in talking about the interrelation that exists between East and West. In fact, Father George has very beautifully pointed out at the beginning what are his important works and how he served as an ambassador of Indian culture and all that one. So one important concept which we have to mention at this juncture is how he could connect the philosophy of East with that of the West. So this is something remarkable. I'm saying that this is remarkable for the main reason that he is well versed both in Indian and Western philosophical tradition. This is something unique. Why? Because you can talk to him on Wittgenstein, you can talk to him about Habermas, you can talk to him about Derrida, you can talk to him about any philosopher of modernity or postmodernity. This is his contribution, I should say. And also he was very much interested in hermeneutics and interfaith religious dialogue, and also the role of philosophy and the role of future humanity. These are some of his important themes which he has been emphasizing throughout his life. And in this context, I would like to say that the great contributions of the Christian thinkers in India who gave a new outlook towards Indian philosophical tradition. What I'm trying to say is that there are great Christian thinkers who have contributed very much for Indian philosophical tradition. Here, I would like to mention some of them. The first person whom I would like to mention is my formal teacher, I would say formal teacher, PMG, because he is the one who could give a new direction to Indian philosophical tradition. And also there are some other scholars whom I have to mention at this juncture. Father Desmet is from Pune. He is the one who is very closely connected to Shankara's philosophy. And Father Ivo actually has collected some of his papers and brought out a volume, Brahman and Person. This is a very beautiful book in which he shows how Father Desmet has talked about the significance of Shankara's philosophy, which not only talks about Brahman, but also the person. This is his unique contribution, Father Desmet. Another important thinker is Father Francis de Souza. He was teaching in Pune. He's a very renowned scholar on hermeneutics and Mimamsa. And another important thinker whom I would like to mention at this juncture is Raimondo Panikkar, who in his interesting book, Vedic Experience, talks about the significance of Indian conception of values. Why I am mentioning all these four? There are many, of course. I have mentioned only four. These four thinkers are very closely related to me, or I was very closely related to these four thinkers because I knew them personally, and I had number of interactions with these great philosophers, theologians, who to a larger extent give me a new way of understanding philosophical problem. So at this juncture, I remember these great Christian thinkers who has contributed substantially for the progress of Indian philosophical tradition. The well-known contemporary thinker Jaya Krishna, some of you are aware of this name, Jaya Krishna, who in one of his articles talks about the great contributions made by the Christian thinkers with regard to Indian philosophy. This we have to mention because now we are talking about PMG, who has given a new way of looking at Indian philosophical tradition. In fact, last year, the 25th memorial program was held on behalf of PMG at Kottayam during November 23rd. And this very important program, which I was able to attend, I could also say a few words, was inaugurated by His Holiness the Catholicos, and it was presided over by Father Dr. John Abraham, and also my good friend Father George has given some of his reflections. And at this juncture, I must also point out that KM George is mainly responsible, according to me, is mainly responsible for editing some of the works of PMG. In fact, he was mentioning about PMG, that is Paulos Gregorios, a reader. That book is something which is very remarkable because I feel that a philosopher should read this book, because this book, an elaborative book which contains a lot of articles by PMG, was very beautifully edited by my good friend Father KM George. And also another important book which I have to mention here is Philosophy East and West, which was also edited by Professor Father George. in these two books, you can understand a glimpse of PMG. If somebody wants to know who is PMG, then they should read these two books so that they can have a better understanding of philosophical discourse, both East and West. This is something which is very important, which has to be emphasized for the main reason that in these two books, it talks about the significance, not only the significance of philosophy, but also the significance of culture. How philosophy and culture can always travel together. And in all these essays, one thing which I would like to mention here is in all these essays, PMG could develop a holistic approach, a holistic approach against the fragmentary approach which is held by many of us. Because while appreciating the Indian culture and Indian values as well as Indian philosophical tradition, PMG points out that his approach is something which can take the humanity to the future. So he says he believes in developing what is known as the holistic approach. There is no point in analyzing or examining a concept in a fragmentary way. That's what he says. For example, our father King George also has pointed out that how he was also influenced by or attracted by Madhyamika Buddhism, and he could show that there is a place for Buddhism in world culture. In fact, he was thorough about not only about Shankara or Ramanuja, but also Madhva, but also about the Buddhist tradition. He was closely reading Dinaga. He was closely reading Nagarjuna, and he could boldly say that if humanity wants to progress, then it has to depend on some of the concepts that is explained by these two great thinkers, that is Dinaga as well as Nagarjuna. So this is something remarkable, I would say. He was able to connect both Western culture as well as Indian culture. That's why I titled my talk or my presentation as Philosophy and Confluence of Culture. He, at the same time, he was very bold enough to criticize the Western culture or the Western model of reality. He says in Western philosophy, there is always a dichotomy. A dichotomy, what is a dichotomy? The dichotomy that exists between what is static and what is dynamic. The dichotomy that exists between a conceptual understanding and non-conceptual understanding. The dichotomy that exists between mind and body. These are some of the dichotomies. In fact, he was very much influenced by Derrida, I would say, because Derrida was also pointing out these dichotomies like speech versus writing, mind versus body, and then culture versus nature. So all these dichotomies would not help us to progress. In fact, Derrida would go to the extent of saying, in these dichotomies, what we do is we try to prioritize one over the other, right? That's why he wants to reject this sort of dichotomies. Perhaps anticipating this long back, our PMG has pointed out that the Western dichotomies will not help us in understanding the total structure of reality. This is something remarkable because he is the one who talks about the holistic approach, and wherein he shows that these dichotomies which we find in Western philosophy are transcended, right, in Indian philosophical tradition. This is a remarkable point of a PMG, which I would like to quote here. Because his love for Indian culture, Indian values, Indian civilization, and Indian philosophical tradition is something which is very important, which one should always take into account while analyzing or evaluating PMG's contribution. And he shows the entire philosophical discussion in Indian tradition is centered on two great thinkers. One is Shankara and the other is Lord Buddha. And he was able to show that both Buddhist as well as the Christian tradition, both how they approach the concept of wholeness, both Buddhism as well as Christianity, according to him, these traditions talk about the wholeness. I would like to quote PMG. He says, I quote, "We cannot know the whole, but the whole makes it possible for us into it, and there to find bliss and peace." So this is a very beautiful quotation of PMG, wherein he says, though we make an attempt to understand the whole, it is not possible for us to understand the whole, but at the same time, it gives us a direction. The concept of wholeness gives us a direction to work further for the development of human society. And another very fascinating theme which he has been writing throughout his life is the world peace, the concept of world peace. He says that he is the one who talks about, he was an open critic of the Soviet communist regime. At the same time, he praises Karl Marx. In many of his writings, I was surprised. He was able to show successfully that how Karl Marx has given a new direction to humanity. And he says Marx's approach towards social and economic order is something remarkable. And he says this is very much essential for the progress of humanity. This is something I was astonished. In fact, somewhere I read Govinda Pillai, a well-known communist leader in Kerala, says he's a Marxist. He says that PMG is guru. I think I read this in the foreword given by K.M. George, if I remember correctly. So he was very much aware of the fact that how the Marxian ethics or Marxian methodology or social philosophy can give a proper perspective towards social and economic order. And also he was very vehemently attacking or critiquing science and technology. So this actually reminds me the criticism made by both Heidegger and Husserl with regard to science and technology. All of us know that Heidegger is the one who came heavily on the technology. And Husserl, in his well-known book, all of us know the crisis of European society, talks about the limitation of science. So, in fact, PMG uses these two models, the Heideggerian model as well as Husserlian model, to criticize or to attack some of the evil aspects of science and technology. Of course, he shows gives proper importance to science and technology, but at the same time, he says it has to be evaluated. In fact, many contemporary thinkers in Western tradition, especially Richard Rorty and others, have pointed out this. Now, when he is talking about the confluence of culture, he talks about how the cultural tradition in various continents, for example, in Mesopotamia, Greece, Persia, Egypt, in India, they have the cultural tradition, though they have got different cultural tradition, they converge at one point. that all these cultures talk about human society or the welfare of human society. And also he talks about how there were cultural exchanges between India and Greece. And he could show, because this is something which I would like to point out here, because whenever he sees something very much remarkable in the West or in the Western tradition, he tries to show that such thing is available in Indian tradition also. So this is very important, and one needs extra skill, which means one must know both cultures. Then only one can say that similar aspects are very much available in the other tradition also. So he's well versed in all cultures. So for example, he could see the Indian element in Platon's thought. He says this is very much visible in the Upanishadic understanding of Brahman, Atman, and Jagat. You can see how the Platonist thought would be seen in the light of the Upanishadic thought. So this is something where you can see the confluence of culture. Different cultures can unite at a particular point. And also, I was amazed. I said this in the last meeting also last year, that I was amazed to read his writings or listen to his lectures, because I had the privilege. So I can talk about that. I had the privilege of listening to him. And I was amazed because how this person could have so much knowledge. You could talk about philosophy of science. You could talk about modernism or postmodernism. You can talk about Marxism. You can talk about culture. You can talk about psychoanalysis and whatnot. This is something very much astonishing and amazing. And and also he talks about the Mani Pravalana style of writing in Tamil. When I read that last year, I was very much surprised. So he is well versed with the different cultures that were prevalent in India, whether it is Tamil culture or Keralite culture. This is something where you can see how he was great in connecting these different cultures. And while talking about not only in Indian philosophical, that is ancient philosophical tradition, because systems like Shankya and Buddhism are very close to his heart. And he admired thinkers like Shankara, Ramanuja, Madhva, and then thinkers like Dinaga and Nagarjuna. This is one part of the story, which means he's a one who talks about the classical Indian systems of philosophy or ancient system of philosophy. Also, he is aware of the fact that how the contemporary Indian philosophers like Sri Aurobindo, Gandhi, Swami Vivekananda, and many others, Vinobaji, how these thinkers, all these contemporary thinkers have contributed substantially for the progress of philosophy. So he was not only well versed in classical Indian systems of philosophy, but also in the modern philosophy, or what we call contemporary Indian philosophical system. And also he has talked about meaning, that how we give meaning to words. And in this context, he has asked this question, has history got some meaning? Whether there is some order in the history. In fact, this is a lecture which he delivered long back in Madras University, on Principal William Miller Endowment Lecture on the inner meaning of the title of this essay is The Inner Meaning of History, wherein he has raised these very important issues, but due to the limitation of time, I am not entering into that. Then one important essay which I would like, can I take another 10 minutes for that? For that?
Yes, please. Dr.
Yeah. So please stop me when I exceed my time. Please.
Yes, please.
because he talks about, one of the important essays which I would like to mention here is, can philosophy create culture? This is a very fascinating essay wherein he talks about Janus Hussein Key. Quoting him, he says that philosophy is the architecture of culture. And he says philosophy is the foundation of culture. After explaining this position, PMG says that it is philosophy which gives meaning to culture. And he says culture is that which preserves our values, our tradition and historicity, and there is a interrelation between philosophy and culture. In fact, all philosophy is connected to culture. So this question, namely, can philosophy create culture, is a very valid question raised by him. And he says that philosophy is the architect of culture. Now, I would like to point out that his way of understanding a dialogue is also important, because he's the one who, I would say, if I'm right, I don't know. If I'm wrong, Father George should correct me. That is the one who has promoted the interfaith dialogue among different religious faiths, and also the church dialogue. I would say he is mainly responsible for that. Now, now, what is a dialogue? This is a question which he raises in one of his fascinating essays. And he says, quoting Martin Buber, he says he's the one who has properly used this word dialogue in his writings. But at the same time, PMG says that prior to Martin Buber, we have great thinkers like Plato and Aristotle, and also in the Upanishads, we see a dialogical dialogue. And PMG, he traces the origin of the word. And he says in Socrates, we see how dialogue is used as a dialectical conversation. And he says, in all of us know that in Socrates dialogue, there is always the expectation which Socrates would try to get from the listener. For example, you would ask a question, what is justice? What is good? What is beauty? And you try to get the answers from the listener. So keeping that at the backdrop, our PMG says that it is the conclusion which is not drawn directly from the speaker. Normally, when a speaker says something, he tries to, for example, define what is good and what is beauty and what is justice, etc. But in Socrates, according to PMG, that the conclusions are not drawn from speaker, but it is derived, and by raising some skillful question, get the answer. So this is a methodology of Socrates, and PMG says that dialogue started with this mode of approach, wherein you can see how both the speaker and the listener can participate. This is very important, that participatory dialogue or participatory understanding or participatory humanism, to use the words of late Professor R. Sundarajan. This is participatory understanding or participatory humanism is something which he was trying to, PMG was trying to develop. And by quoting Martin Buber, PMG says that in a dialogue, there is always a twofold movement. This is a very fascinating one. So I would like to quote this. He says that in Martin Buber, I would like to repeat, in Martin Buber, when dialogue takes place, the dialogue takes place in the form of twofold movement. What is that? One is turning towards the other, right? And secondly, the abandonment of a self-isolation for an inclusive awareness. Of course, now we are talking about after Levinas, Emmanuel Levinas, the concept of the other has become a very prominent theme in Western philosophical discourse. But long back, PMG, by using the methodology of Martin Buber, would successfully show that in dialogue, there is always turning towards the other, and that there is also, we are transcending or the abandoning of the self-isolation. So this is something which has to be taken into account whenever there is a inter-religious dialogue. And true dialogue requires, according to PMG, true dialogue, if at all there is a dialogue, if it is a true dialogue, three things must take place. What is that? Three things must take place. One, the possibility of addressing and being addressed as a medium of communication. And second is the ability to face the other. This I think is a very important point. The ability to face the other without apprehension or prejudgment. Because in most of the dialogue, this is not taking place because we have a prejudgment or apprehension about the other, then we'll start our dialogue. So this is not the correct procedure according to PMG. So he says the ability to face the other without apprehension or prejudgment. And thirdly, the willingness to enter into the inner life of the other. Now, I think in many of the universities as well as in colleges and in many forums, there is inter-religious dialogue that is taking place. In fact, I am the one who always supports this inter-religious dialogue for better understanding of humanity. In fact, I have participated in many inter-religious dialogue, especially the Hindu-Christian dialogue. And I found that abruptly this dialogue would stop for the main reason that we unfortunately start with some presupposition. Now, after reading PMG's approach, one can understand or one can know that a prejudgment or apprehension of the other has to be transcended. So if there is to be a genuine dialogue, then we must be able to understand the other without any prejudgment. When I read this part of PMG's writing, I was reminded of Habermas, because Habermas also our PMG quotes. I was really wondering, he was a church father attending so many works, right? Administrative as well as preaching and all. But in spite of that, where did he get time to read all the Western thinkers as well as Indian thinkers? That too, it is not at the periphery level. He goes into the problem and tries to find out a solution to the problems. So he's the one who could talk about whether it is Indian thinker or Western thinker. Now, I'm coming back to Habermas, because why I mentioned this is, he's the one, while talking about Gadamer, he talks about Habermas also. Now, Habermas also talks about what is known as ideal speech situation. Habermas says, how can we have a dialogue, right? And he says, in order to have a genuine dialogue, we should not have any presupposition. Now, this has been pointed out by PMG. That is, if you have some reservation or if you have some preconceived notion about the other, then genuine dialogue will not take place. So this has been emphasized by our PMG also. And I feel that this method of approach, this comprehensive approach, or the holistic approach of PMG is very much essential for the entire human society. I would like to quote how he could interpret or reinterpret some of our Indian philosophical tradition. Because no, I was talking about his lecture in 1976 in Kerala, all the way, where I think Professor Krishna Warrior was the chairman of the Congress. And in this presidential address, our PMG talks about the philosophy of Shankara, and he made a very significant point. What is that? He says, I was struck by this statement. He says that Shankara was the reviver of the Upanishadic tradition. When I read this sentence for some of you might appear very simple, but the word reviver of the Upanishadic tradition has a lot of inner meaning. Why did he say that Shankara? Why did PMG say that Shankara is the reviver of Upanishadic tradition? Now, when he has used the word reviver, it implies that it was Shankara who could give a reinterpretation, right, for the Upanishadic tradition. For example, in the Prasthanatraya, all of us know the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, and the Brahma Sutras constitute the Prasthanatraya, wherein Shankara gives a different connotational meaning to some of the concepts which are available in Upanishads. For example, the Upanishadic statement like Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. This is an Upanishadic statement. And this has been interpreted and reinterpreted by Shankara. Keeping this in mind, PMG has very rightly said that Shankara is the reviver of the Upanishadic tradition. And also, another significant point which I have to mention here is that he could look at Shankara, because the title of his talk is The Philosophy of Shankara. He could look at Shankara and argue that there are many social forces and phenomena which shaped Shankara. This is a very important approach towards Shankara, and sometimes many philosophers also miss this point. But PMG has pointed out that the social conditions and social forces and phenomena have shaped the philosophy of Shankara. And also he talks about how there is a close affinity between Christianity and the teaching of Shankara. What is that? He says that the kind of Christianity which he belongs to, that is, all of us know that he belongs to the Oriental Orthodox tradition. And he says that there is a close affinity between the Oriental Orthodox tradition of Christianity and Shankara. He says both these traditions, the tradition of Shankara as well as the Oriental Orthodox tradition of Christianity, they conjoin together or they agree with each other. Why? Because both these traditions reject all dualism. So dualism is rejected by both the traditions. And he says that there is no duality in Jesus Christ. This is a very important point, which I liked very much. He says that there is no duality in Jesus Christ. Not only that, even in the creator-creation dualism is not ultimately dual. This is his point, so I'm reading it. So I would like to repeat it. He says that there is no duality in Jesus Christ. Not only that, even the creator-creation dualism is not ultimately dual. since creation has only a contingent existence, and in itself is vanity and nothingness. So based on this, he comes to the conclusion that non-dual understanding of reality is essential, whether it is Vedanta or Christianity. And I'll take another 5 minutes if time permits. I would like to explain some of his concepts with regard to hermeneutics. And before that, I would like to state that how he was very much interested in reinterpreting Indian philosophical tradition. And his major concern was, how do we contextualize, right, Indian philosophy in the context of a global philosophy or the world philosophy? That is, in other words, to put it in simple terms, how to context Indian philosophy in global structure or in global philosophy or world philosophy. Because one way of understanding is philosophy is a way of life. And he was very much influenced by Dr. Radhakrishnan. And he says that it is Radhakrishnan who has revitalized Indian philosophy, or by giving reinterpretation to many of our philosophical concepts, he could give a new direction to Western philosophy. Because prior to that, philosophy in India was considered something inferior. In fact, it is said that India had no philosophy at all, but thanks to Dr. Radhakrishnan, Westerners also could understand that Indian philosophy is something remarkable, and there are some concepts which are very fascinating in Indian philosophical tradition. And one can compare Shankara with Wittgenstein or Plato or Aristotle. So this comparison was possible because of the reinterpretation of Indian philosophy, which was mainly due to Radhakrishnan. So PMG appreciates the great contribution made by the academic philosophers like Radhakrishnan. But at the same time, this is very important, at the same time, PMG talks about the non-academic philosophers. It is very, very, very astonishing that the word non-academic philosophers, the word non-academic philosophers is used. Of course, in a very right perspective. Of course, prior to that, I could read T.M.P. Mahadevan, who also talks about the non-academic philosophers. And also my teacher, R. Balasubramaniam, also talks about non-academic philosophers. What is the distinction between non-academic philosophers? Why PMG should use this word? This is very important. Who are the non-academic philosophers? For example, he says Gandhi, Tagore, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, Ramana Maharishi. These are non-academic philosophers. When we say non-academic philosophers, it means that these philosophers' contribution to problems of life is something directly connected to human society. These thinkers, the so-called non-academic philosophers, views or philosophical discourse has got a direct bearing on human life. So this has made our PMG to make a distinction between academic and non-academic philosophers. And at one juncture, he says that non-academic philosophy develops in ashram. This is something which he says is very important. And we have to give importance to the philosophy which is developed in ashram also. Then I come to the last part, that is his area of interest with regard to postmodernity or postmodernism and hermeneutics. All of us know that postmodernism is a very important movement. I don't know whether one can call it as a movement or a way of understanding philosophical problem. I don't know how to call it. But it has given a new direction to philosophical problems, because all of us know the distinction between modernity and postmodernity, and PMG also writes in detail the distinction between modernity and postmodernity. And he says how modernity was very much dependent on, how modernity was dependent on rationalism, whereas though this rationality is something very important, it has been pointed out by many thinkers that it has led to some evil consequences also, which cannot be denied. So there was a need for postmodernism. And in this context, PMG makes a reference to thinkers like Toynbee, for example, and also thinkers like Gadamer, Habermas, Derrida, Lyotard, Appel, and many others. What he's trying to say is that in postmodernity, there is the plurality of views, and the plurality of culture is celebrated, and difference is celebrated. Multiplicity is celebrated. In this context, PMG talks about how Jaina philosophy, that is how they talk about Anekantavada, which comes very close to the postmodern understanding. And also, what is the task of Indian philosophy today? This is a very important issue which is bothering philosophers in departments of philosophy. What is the task of Indian philosophy or Indian philosophers today? The question which PMG raises is very important. He asks this question: has Indian philosophy made a perceptible impact on world thought in recent times? Question mark. This is a very important question, because there are many thinkers in India point out that especially in the contemporary Indian philosophy, we have not made any progress. This is debated very well in many academic circles. Now, the answer which is given by PMG is very interesting. He says that the question is something very important, which has to be probed further in order to get some responsible answers. And he says there are three ways which one can analyze this question. One is that the first is the academic philosophy as it comes out of Indian universities. What type of academic philosophy is coming out from Indian universities? What type of research that is going on in Indian universities? This is the first question which he raises in order to contextualize Indian philosophy in the world map. And secondly, we should know that philosophy is a way of life. If you forget the fact that philosophy is way of life, and if we go on working on some abstract concepts, in short, we call it armchair philosophy, which has no relevance to practical life, then there is no use. And third is a theoretically articulated philosophy, not coming from academic philosophy, but from ashram. Just now I made a reference to that. He says that philosophy which comes out from non-academic circles, especially in ashram, has to be celebrated because it has got a direct bearing on life. And while talking about a dialogue, he talks about some other, dialogue with other religions. He talks about the salient features, how the dialogue should go on and all. In fact, he gives 10 points, but I would like to give only 1 point here for want of time. One is dialogue, which begins, should not be broken up abruptly. So he says, don't stop your dialogue abruptly. No, just now I was mentioning how in many of our dialogue with the Christian friends or the Christian friends with the Hindu friends, stops abruptly. I also use the same word, abruptly. And our PMG sir says the dialogue which has begun should not be broken abruptly. And secondly, he says that dialogue must lead to a practical consequences, perhaps to work together to develop inter-communal harmony. This, I think, is a very beautiful concept. This is what we need. Inter-communal harmony is very much very important, because in Indian context, we talk about Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam. Entire world is our family. And the third point which he has mentioned, I've got 10 points I said. The third point which I would like to quote here is, dialogue cannot be a single act. It is a process of living together in openness to each other and genuinely growing together. Genuinely growing together. This 3 important points, for 10 points, I have made a reference to these 3 points. And this will give a new direction for interreligious understanding. And I would, in fact, request both my Hindu as well as Christian friends to keep this in mind before opening any interfaith dialogue, which I think can bring humanity together. Only, I strongly feel, only the interreligious dialogue can bring humanity together. So all religions, he says, must work together for peaceful coexistence. And he talks, in this context, he talks about a kind of Panchashil, which is very much essential for religions. One is the first 5 Panchashil point. One is mutual respect. And second is non-discrimination. Third is dialogue. Fourth is resolution of conflicts by peaceful means. Then cooperation in the service of humanity. So this, I think, is very important in the context of PMG. Then with the 2 minutes, I'll complete. Then he talks about the new concept of humanity. In fact, he's asking us this very important question. What do we mean by human? Because once he says, once it was believed that Protagoras statement is very valid. What is that? Man is a measure of everything. That man is the center of everything, and everything must go around man. So man becomes important. But now PMG says it is not the case. Human being or man has a major responsibility for the welfare of the created order. And so he cannot claim that he is the sole master of the entire universe. So in this context, PMG develops a very important, beautiful concept, that is balanced understanding. He says that there should be a balanced understanding between humanity, that is human and non-human. That is, he talks about the existence and the non-existence has to be taken into account. That is, all existence and non-existence, right? There are inert or matter, etc. They are interconnected, and nothing that has come to be is totally isolated or unrelated. And thirdly says that all life is interconnected, whether it is having life or non-life, it is very important. In this context, I was reminded of Raimondo Paniker's cosmotheandric vision, wherein he talks about the 3 concepts, namely God, world, and human. These 3 are interrelated. Similarly, if you come to Vishishtadvaita philosophy in Indian tradition, they also talk about Chit, Achit, and Ishvara. Chit is consciousness, and Achit is matter, and Ishvara, that is Vishnu. So all 3 are interrelated. So this kind of understanding, what I'm trying to say is, PMG has very rightly pointed out that we have to take into account the life and non-life, or the existence and non-existence together in order to understand humanity. So humanity, he says, is an integral part of both life and non-life. It is the bundle of existence. And finally, he says consciousness is the essential entity which pervades the entire human society. And one more point with that I'll close. The kingdom of this very important book, which a very small book, that is the title of the book is The Kingdom of Diaconia. This is a very important work for the main reason that it contains a lot of biblical studies, Bible studies, wherein he takes a particular phrase from Bible and try to interpret the meaning so that it can be useful for the entire society. So here the selfless serviceability is emphasized by PMG in this book, The Kingdom of Diaconia. And here this book is very important for me for the main reason. Here he talks about, he uses the methodology of the hermeneutics, because all of us know it was the Christian priests or fathers who could give a real meaning to hermeneutics, because in the beginning it was used in order to understand Bible, but later this method of interpretation, which our PMG also uses in this book, The Kingdom of Diaconia, this wherein he talks about interpretation, and later this is extended to other though it started with the biblical teachers, I mean the Christian priests, later thinkers like Schleiermacher, Dilthey, Heidegger, Gadamer, and all these thinkers have applied this method of interpretation. And for Gadamer, he was fascinated by Gadamer, and he says for Gadamer, tradition and language is very important. So I feel that the interpretation, reinterpretation is very much essential for our PMG in order to understand the entire cosmos. So I would like to conclude by saying that the method of approach of PMG is not only remarkable, but something innovative. It is innovative in the sense that he could visualize a humanity which is free from conflicts, and use it in order to reach that humanity, in order to reach that level, he is using both the philosophy as well as theology. So I would say both philosophy and theology and culture, all this for him are used as a tool to understand the future of humanity. So he takes us to a new world order, wherein we can have a perfect understanding with each other, where we can really understand, a genuine dialogue can take place. And this methodology is something remarkable, which has fascinated me because he could understand, first of all, both Indian and Western tradition, and also give a new methodology for understanding contemporary as well as classical Indian philosophy. And also he is well versed in all the disciplines of philosophy. And he could, for example, his way of understanding philosophy science is something remarkable. His way of understanding some of the concepts which are used in psychoanalysis is something very fascinating. So he's a versatile scholar who should be thoroughly read in order to have a full glimpse of PMG. It is very difficult. In this 45 minutes lecture, I cannot explain. There are many aspects which I have not touched. I know my limitation, because I need at least a week to explain each and every concept, because I'm always a co-traveler with him. It is because of the main reason that I was very closely associated with him from 1976 onwards. And though he was not my direct teacher, I always consider him as my teacher. He's my formal teacher, but it is always a pleasant experience to sit at him. I would say he's like an Upanishadic teacher, because in the Upanishad it is said that sitting near the teacher and receiving instruction about ultimate reality. So I always sit with him, listen to him. I admire him and I listen to him. And whenever I ask some sometimes silly questions also, he would patiently laugh, and then he would answer my questions. Such a very beautiful personality, and I always admire him. He's my teacher, and today we are celebrating Teachers' Day. So I salute him for the main reason that he has taught me many things. And I would say that my approach towards philosophy was largely shaped by him, because my approach to uh, subjects like postmodernism, hermeneutics, and other area is because PMG has given me a proper direction. Thank you very much. I am very much privileged to deliver this lecture. My good friend is Professor George, sir, and he's always affectionate to me, and he was very kind enough to invite me, and I always feel happy to talk about PMG. Because when somebody is close to your heart, you feel like talking about that person. So he's a great personality whom I always admire, and I salute him, and I am sure that he will be listening to my lecture, so he is in heaven. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Acha, can you unmute your line? We cannot hear you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Panneerselvam. You have given a wonderful testimony to the teacher on this Teachers' Day. Yes, you have been sitting at the feet, and like us, we have learned a lot from this great teacher. And you have explored meticulously some of the philosophical dimensions of Paulos Gregorios. Dr. Panneerselvam, you know that most of us know him as an ecclesiastical person, as a priest and a bishop, nothing more. But you have unveiled a whole universe of his personality, which is rather hidden to many of us. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, sir.
Particularly, you have brought to our attention his concern for the holistic approach, the non-dichotomous holistic approach. I know as a student that in the 60s and 70s, it was specialization, emphasis on specialization, and very often they ignored the total picture. But since then, ever since I was a student of Paulos Gregorios, he was emphasizing this total picture over against a fragmentation, and you have very clearly brought it up. And also his concern for the thinking of Hans-Georg Gadamer. I still remember as a student how he taught us Gadamer's idea of tradition and prejudice, the prejudgment. He himself comes from an ancient Christian tradition, which has so much emphasis on tradition. And so this modern German philosopher had something to tell him about his own struggle with tradition. And he beautifully brought it down. You have highlighted that. And many other points, the connection between the academy and the ashram, which is something very important in our university system today, because we have come to a wrong understanding of the secular, where you completely ignore the transcendent values. So he's taking us back to that very fruitful alliance between the academia and the ashram, so many things. And you have rightly said that in 45 minutes or 1 hour, you cannot bring all those elements of thought. But we are very grateful to you, Dr. Panneerselvam, for what you have told us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
And we have some time for some immediate questions and discussion, and
Yes,
Dr. Selvam would be very happy to interact.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Is there any question or?
Uh, Hello, good evening, Acha.
Yes,
My
please.
name is Neetu Matthew. Can you listen? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah, yes.
Acha, I have a question for sir. It was based on when he quoted Remendo Gandhi. I don't know the exact name because it wasn't clear to me. Professor talked of something called Chit Achit and of Ishvara. So if he could explain the concept of consciousness, matter, and Vishnu on a brief note so as to get grasp of it, and refer to as a text of the Paulos Gregorios remaining to work upon to know this particular concept. If Professor could recommend us of a text and explain the concept as well.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thank you, Minu Matthew, for your wonderful question. Now, PMG, while talking about the future of humanity, argued that we have to take into account the existence and non-existence. It's a very fascinating theme because we think that, normally we take into account those things which have consciousness. This is how we view that. For example, we look at the existence as something very precious. Person is something important. Life is something important. But now, when we are reading ecology, for example, or environmental philosophy, it has been pointed out by many thinkers that not only existence is important, non-existence, that which does not exist, that which has no life, is also important. Because this cosmos contains living and non-living. Hello? Hello? Can I go further?
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Go ahead, please. Yes.
So both living and non-living. This is what PMG says. Now, I could see this in two great traditions. One is a Christian tradition, which is very much emphasized by, Remendo Panikkar, who talks about the cosmotheandric vision, where he talks about cosmotheandric, God, world, and man. So all the three are important. Now, if you come to Indian tradition, especially the Vishishtadvaita tradition, Vaishnava tradition, in other words, they talk about three eternal realities. What are they? Chit, that is consciousness, life. Then Achit, inert, matter, that is. Then Ishvara, that is identical to Lord Vishnu. Now, though there are three eternal realities, it is ultimately the Ishvara or Vishnu who is the controller of everything. That's a different issue altogether. What I'm trying to say is that Vishishtadvaita not only gives importance to Chitta, but also Achit. Now, what is Achit here? Matter, inert. That is, in other words, to put it in simple terms, it is non-living. So that is also taken into account in the Indian tradition, which has been emphasized by Paul Gregorios now. Because now it has been very strongly argued by the ecologists that we have to take the non-life also, and which has been emphasized long back by PMG. So this method of approach is something remarkable. Now only, I would say, the past 10 or 15 years, we are talking about non-life, because we understood the significance of non-life. Non-life is also part of the cosmos. But PMG long back has emphasized that. But if you probe further, you would find this in Indian tradition also. This is what I was trying to say.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
So my name is Thomas Verghese. I just wanted you to elaborate a little bit. When you mentioned about the non-dual nature and how the Oriental Orthodox Christian tradition and the non-duality, which is the Advaita tradition of Shankara, in Paulos Gregorios vision, I mean, there's similarity. I just want to first ask you, the source text, that you were reading this from. So that's one thing. And secondly, again, when we look at the world as, in the previous, discussion, we spoke about Chit, Achit, and, Ishvara. So how does the oneness of Advaita and non-duality, so the Advaita and the Vishishta Advaita, at some level, at least at an epistemological level, there seems to be some kind of a slight incompatibility. So how is this reconciled in the world vision of Paulos Gregorios? So the oneness, where there is no ontological gap between the creator and the creature, that is the Shankara viewpoint. But at the same time, in Vishishta Advaita, consciousness, matter, and Ishvara are seen as three, like, realities again brought into one. So how does this reconcile?
Thank you, Father Thomas Verghese, for your wonderful question. Now, with regard to Vishishtadvaita and Advaita, or Advaita and Vishishtadvaita, it's a chronological order. They have got two ways of understanding reality, because their ontological position is something important. As you know, though the texts are one and the same, the Prasthanatraya are one and the same, that is Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Sutra, and Upanishads. They are the basic texts for both. Not only for both, but also for Madhva. Now, for all these acharyas, three great acharyas, Shankara, that is Advaita, Ramanuja, Vishishtadvaita, Madhva, Dvaita. So for all these great acharyas, the texts are one and the same. But the text could get a different interpretation. Let us say three different interpretations. There are many interpretations. Later also many thinkers interpreted. But these are the basic. And moreover, I am concerned about Shankara and Ramanuja, since you have asked this. Now, with regard to Shankara, one has to understand that in the concept of dualism, non-dualism only. Because it is not two. That's why it is non-dualism. Sometimes it is said monism, but my teacher would say monism is not a correct way of understanding Shankara, because monism, when you use the word monism, it means one. But we are not talking about that one. Because once you say that one, it implies that two is there. So Shankara carefully avoided this and used the word non-dualism, Advaita. A plus Dvaita. Dvaita, dualism are not so. Now, this non-dualism is one way of, I'm saying, one way of understanding the reality. So what is that? Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya. Brahman alone is real. All other things are not real or illusory. So for Shankara, it is very clear that non-dualism is the highest reality. So this method of understanding the reality, that is non-dualism, is not acceptable to Ramanuja. Because Ramanuja's philosophy is known as Vishishtatvaita. It is not Advaita, it is Vishishta plus Advaita, which means it is qualified monism, which means it is a philosophy, that is Vishtadvaita as a philosophy, which talks about three eternal realities. So for them, dualism it is inevitable. But we should remember the fact, though there are three realities, Vishnu is the supreme reality and all other are dependent on him. That is a different story altogether. So this way of understanding Advaita, dualism is different from that of Vishtadvaita, qualified monism. So this approach is to be understood in Indian philosophical tradition. But which is the right procedure or which one is right? Nobody can say that, which is right. Why? Because it all depends on your ontological standpoint. For Shankara, it is clear that Brahman alone is the ultimate reality. So naturally, all other things do not exist. So one can say this is one way of understanding the reality. But it need not be correct always. That is the reason why Ramanuja could give a different interpretation. That interpretation is also right. Why? It all depends on your ontological status. Which tools of understanding you are using to understand Shankara or Ramanuja. This is very important. So I hope you understood the distinction between these two. Now you wanted me to give the source. I want you to read this book, Philosophy East and West, edited by K.M. George, wherein there is one article. I don't remember the article now, but these words are very much present there, because he says, I want to repeat it once again. He says that the kind of Christian which we belong to, that is the Oriental Orthodox tradition of Christianity. He says it agrees with Shankara, because he is of the view that both deny non-dualism as the ultimate reality. And I think that with regard to his approach, this is quite acceptable. I don't know how you would view this from your Christian point of view, because I feel the Oriental Orthodox tradition of Christianity talk about non-duality. Of course, I know I'm not a scholar in Christianity, but I feel that this approach, I mean, he himself says, it is not my interpretation or my reading. You can see that book. You give me your email, I can dispatch you the article. I mean, I can quote the article, but it is available in the book Philosophy East and West. Because he says, because when I read that few days ago, I was astonished. I really like this because he says that in Jesus Christ that there is no duality. And the so-called creator-creation relation dualism is ultimately not acceptable, or it is also
transcended.
Transcended. So this is something which could be understood in this way. And also here I would like to talk about when Shankara talks about non-duality, because in Advaita, as you know, they talk about two levels of reality. One is Vyavaharika level and another is Paramarthika. Yeah, in Vyavaharika level, they accept the world. But ultimately, the world is not ultimately real. So in the Paramarthika level, that question will not arise. So you can apply that in Christian tradition also, the creator creation. So the creator creation is there. But in Shankara also we find that Ishvara is a creator. But that is not ultimately real. So I feel that there is an affinity between this Oriental Orthodox tradition of Christianity and Shankara. Right. But I am very very clear about Shankara, but with regard to Christianity, I cannot go further because of my limitation. But you have to tell me whether Oriental Orthodox tradition of Christianity would allow non-dualism. This is
Thank you,
you
sir.
are the right person to
Yeah, I
perhaps
think
Raj can throw some.
yes, Dr. Panneerselvam, from the Orthodox theological side, I may just make a little comment to supplement what you have said, because in the Orthodox tradition, we have the idea of theosis or deification, divinization of the created reality. Human beings, already created in God's image and likeness, are called to transfigured, called to be transfigured to God's nature. So this is ultimately, in a way, transcending the duality between creator and the created reality. So it is at that point that you see the non-dualistic thinking in India congenial to the Orthodox Eastern understanding. I think that's a very interesting common ground which we should explore. Now I think we have we need to conclude this session, although there may be other questions, and I want to thank you very much, Professor Panneerselvam. We are looking forward to the written text of your presentation so that we can publish it from the Paulos Gregorios chair of the Mahatma Gandhi University. And I thank you all who participated, and particularly my thanks go to Ronnie David in Bangalore and Father Dr. Bijay Philip in Kottayam, who helped me to technically to have this session without any problem. And thank you very much, and God bless you. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the judge. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.